Hi everyone, it's Danny. Alrighty, so today we will discuss about orchid maintenance. What is orchid maintenance, why it's important to perform it, and so on. Now this video will have two parts actually. In the first part, we will discuss about how to properly maintain the surface part of the orchid, so pseudobulbs, foliage, and so on. And in the second part of the video, we will discuss about maintaining the root system of an orchid, so practically the bottom part, the one we don't usually see. Now, I would really like to start by talking about why it is important for us to perform maintenance on our orchids. Because you might think, well, in nature, nobody actually trims off dead leaves and so on, and everything is fine. So for us to understand why it is actually important to maintain our orchids, I would like to tell you a few ideas about the difference between growing orchids in our home and them growing by themselves in the wild. So when we are growing orchids, and not only orchids, we are trying to replicate the conditions they will normally find in their natural habitat. We can replicate light quantity, temperatures, humidity, and all these external factors that orchids like. There is one single thing that we cannot really replicate, no matter if we grow our orchids in our homes or even in our garden, and this is the bacterial climate orchids usually find in their natural habitat. For the purpose of this video, I will actually only refer to epiphyte orchids because they are quite different than terrestrial orchids, which kind of resemble your usual plants. So as I was saying, we can replicate light quantity and all of those external factors because we have them naturally. The bacterial climate is actually responsible for a lot of chemical processes that happen in the wild and don't actually happen in our home. There is a vast chain of microorganisms and bacteria which work together and depend on each other to give the equilibrium which only Mother Nature can provide. So in their natural habitat, orchids are indeed not helped by humans, but they are helped by these microorganisms and bacteria in ways that we actually cannot understand, at least some of them. Now, this bacterial climate cannot be reproduced in our home, in our pots, not even in our gardens, because as I was saying, all these organisms depend on each other. So if we have a missing link somewhere, a whole chain of microorganisms can be lacking in our environments. There is actually a simple test you can perform to check if your conditions are exactly like in nature. So pollinate an epiphyte orchid, any epiphyte orchid, in order to get a seed pod. When you have a full mature seed pod, take the seeds and spread them in your pots, in your home, in your garden, wherever you like, wherever you grow your orchids. Now, if from the millions of seeds that an orchid can produce, at least one sprouts and reaches maturity, then you can say you have the ideal same conditions as nature would provide for that orchid. If somehow nothing sprouts, then it's safe to assume that you do not have the same exact bacterial conditions that this orchid receives in nature. Now, of course, this applies to those of us who do not live in the same habitat as the orchid we are trying to propagate. If you are fortunate enough to actually have a jungle of orchids in your backyard, this pretty much is sterile. But for the rest of us who grow orchids in our apartments or in totally different continents than where this orchid comes from, it's safe to assume that nothing will sprout. If this was the case, everybody would multiply and propagate orchids in their backyard or in their home. But as we all know, orchids are propagated in special laboratories, very sterile and with special media. There is a very good reason for that. And this is because we cannot replicate the bacterial environment this orchid receives in nature. But this bacterial environment doesn't only apply to propagating orchids. It applies actually to the well-being of the orchid. So let us return to our discussion. So as I was saying, in nature there are special chemical processes that we cannot really replicate. So we don't have the tools that Mother Nature has. For this reason, we are forced to use other tools that we have available in order to maintain an orchid alive in our captive environment. Not to mention our own sense of style. We do not like orchids which have lots of spots on the leaves or shredded leaves. We like orchids that are glossy, we like perfect flowers, and we like to maintain them like that. Who wouldn't love to have a perfect orchid in their home? So the topic we'll start with is maintaining the beautiful foliage.